Testing 1, 2, 3.
I have chosen the way of the truth. Thy judgments have laid before me. I have stuck to thy testimonies. O Lord, put me not to shame. I will run the way of thy commandments. When thou shalt enlarge my heart. Teach me, O Lord, the way of thy statutes, and I shall keep it unto the end. Give me understanding, and I shall keep thy law. Yea, I shall observe it with my whole heart. Make me to go in the path of thy commandments. For
Hello, good morning, welcome to Line by Line. Oops.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Well, there you see. That is why we're late today. Because you get all set up to do the Bible study, and then all of a sudden you test and you realize there's something glitchy going on. And that happens like 1 in 20 times or something like that. All right, so continuing Psalm 18. This one starts off, again, to the chief musician, which I've talked about. To the chief musician belongs with chapter 17. It is the postscript, in my opinion. And my opinion is derived from the way that these little bits of text are, well, when you look at Habakkuk 3 is essentially a psalm extracted from the Psalms, meaning it's a psalm outside of its natural environment, collected with all the other ones. And ends with, to the chief singer on my stringed instruments, and begins with a prayer of Habakkuk, or Habakkuk, depending on which way you're going to pronounce it. It's not a big detail. I should have made just do I mention that in the first psalm, the second? I don't remember. I wish I could, because then I could just say, like, yeah, I mentioned that once. You can look at one if you don't know what I'm talking about. The servant of the Lord. All right, so a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spake unto the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. And he said, so that's a big mouthful. That's the biggest title we've had yet. A psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spake unto to the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord. So there's a psalm of deliverance. Obviously, it's going to be a bit celebratory. You know, some of the ones we've had more recently. Is this? I think I may not be as loud as I usually am. There we go. I've been having to adjust this because I've been doing some recording. Yes, even more recording. More music on the way. So, I will love thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, and my fortress, and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler, and the horn of my salvation, and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. And it's funny because, you know, that's a song. I always thought it was funny because, you know, you know, when I was 21, right after I got married, just prior to that, well, the year before, I'd maybe written one song in my head, you know, for the scriptures. Revelation, the Song of the Lamb, you know, from Revelation. And one little section. And then the Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32. And there are so many cool things to sing about in the Psalms. And when you think about all the things the psalmist wrote about, whether it be David or Asaph or Solomon has at least one, I remember, you know, Hezekiah, the Psalms of the Degrees, and the other ones that are unattributed. But all those Psalms, there's just so much there to sing about. And then, not to mention the prophets. I mean, you can sing the words of the prophets. I certainly do. The prophets are very lyrical. It's very, I don't find it that difficult to put it into songs, though you have to, takes a considerable amount of effort to make it work. But, you know, it just amuses me that this Psalm 18 is a significant psalm. I mean, it's got like, it's the biggest chapter we've done yet in the Psalms, not chapter, the biggest song we've done yet, 50 verses. I mean, that's big. We're going to be on this probably through the end of next week, right? I'm not going to just run over it. And all that we get out of it is, I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. I will call upon the Lord. I wonder if the Lord liveth part is in this psalm. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I haven't sung that song in years, I just remember that. Oh, there it is. They can go down to verse 46 and pick up again. Because we would not want to really, I mean, I guess some people just don't know how to sing about the sorrows of death compassing them and the floods of ungodly men making them afraid. But to me, that's the most, like, if you don't have that contrast, you know what I mean? We talk about God being our rock, but like, you know, God is my rock. I take him with me to the grocery store. I mean, when you're in a world where you have pet rocks, I mean, that was a craze from the 60s or 70s, I think. I remember hearing about it. You know, it was just a rock. It was my pet rock. You know, it's like when you have a world in which rocks are so, you know, not a particularly, you know, in my life, a rock is like, that's what Charlie Brown gets in his trick-or-treat bag. A rock. You know? It's kind of like we have more exciting things than rocks. But like, you know, and we don't build our own homes, so the efficacious, you know, wisdom of putting your house on a rock or other such things, or, you know, we don't quite get, we understand rocks are hard. And maybe we understand the symbology still. But until you compare, you know what I mean, like, until you understand the danger, the negative side of these things, like, God is my rock, he's not just in my pocket while I'm going to the grocery store and living my normal modern life. You know what I mean, living the life we were living a few months ago anyways, because things aren't normal anymore. Not around here. I mean, around here, nothing. The funny thing is, around here, nothing's changed. I mean, it's pretty much the same. But you know, when I have to go out into the world, things are very different. And so, in the midst of difficulty, is when the significance of God being our rock, our fortress, deliverer, God, strength, it becomes more. You know, that's where it gets tested. Is God truly a rock? How does that hold up in the midst of trouble? Because the idea of a rock, you know, is, well, it's interesting that it goes from, you know, fortress, you get deliverer, God, strength, trust, buckler. Rock is such a basic thing. You know, we talk about bedrock. And we said that's the bedrock of the blah 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 blah. The foundation, rock. My house has a rock foundation. It's not cement. It's literally rocks. You know, it's built in 1866, so it's got. You go down the basement, you see rocks. You know, and it's almost like, I think about when they talk about like stone tools. You know, flints. And the most basic things that people rely on for their survival. You know what I mean? Like, you can take shelter in a rock. I mean, literally just a big enough rock can provide shade from heat. I think Jacob used a rock for his pillow when he had the dream of seeing the angels ascending and descending at Bethel, which means the house of God, which is what he called that place. A rock, you know, is like symbolic of like the very base on which we can build things safely. It is also like you see, like I said, Jacob used the rock, which is a hard thing, but as a place to place his head. And while his head was on the rock, he had the dreams of God. And when one can hide in the shadow of a rock from the heat and from the wind and from the weather. You know, one of the ways people die when they're just out in the wilderness or in just, you know, I mean, like if you get away from your house and just go out there and be a human on the planet. I mean, most of us don't have even the knowledge of how to survive. I mean, and people die of exposure. Just being exposed to the environment. It's murderous. We crave and need to take shelter. And God is that most primitive of shelters, but also the most, you know what I mean, like it is, primitive isn't the right word, but the most basic. I mean, he can be like when there's nothing else, we have God. Because the rock is kind of the most, rock, that's everywhere and that's free. I mean, not everywhere, but you know what I mean. Fortress, things men rely on, things men build, on which they trust. I have built up my heart in the Lord. I have built up my relationship with God. He is not just a basic thing I flee to in times of trouble. Meaning, like, you know, we can, like, I think of also the analogy of, like, someone being cast into the sea and then clinging to a rock to avoid being swept away by the current. You know what I mean? Like, that's a visual I've seen somewhere in a painting, in stories, whatever. The idea of clinging to a rock to prevent the waves from overcoming you and dragging you away. You know what I mean? Like, it's like when they talk about foxhole conversions, or like, you know, the people in dire situations, when you have nothing, you turn to God. In their desperation, they often turn to God. God is a rock like that. He is convenient. Sometimes just he's there. You know what I mean? And so people will turn to him like that, like a rock. And that's not nothing negative about it, but it's one way in which men look to God. Like they look to, like, it's just, I need some help. God! The most makeshift shelter of all, a rock. The most, you know, like, where should I build my house? Well, we have this rocky area over here, as opposed to on the sifting sand by the seashore. My fortress. You know, that is something, God is my fortress. Men build up fortresses, they build up walls. But I build up my relationship with God so that I could be in a strong place. He's my rock and my fortress. You know, I flee to him in times of trouble when when there's nothing, but also I have something with him. You know, there's another aspect. He is like something built up in me. I have a strong relationship with him. I've talked to him. I've listened to his word. And that's when God becomes your fortress, is when you invest time in that relationship with God and build up in yourself a place where God lives, I suppose you could say. I mean, like, you know, like God lives in me. And when I say build up in yourself, you know, this is the work of God. So, you know, some people could slice my words too carefully and say, like, well, make it sound like it's some sort of works-based salvation or something. But as you know, I would never teach such a thing. It is the work of God in you to build up in you Christ. And that is like a fortress. Not just the Christ likeness within you becoming like Christ, but also just the intangible aspect of drawing nearer to God, and therefore having something built up between you that acts like a fortress to protect you and to deliver you. And he is our deliverer. Deliverer is a little different, though, right? Someone a deliverer is like a person, an individual. It is not like an inanimate object. We went from like rock to fortress to deliverer. He is deliverer. You know, men in history throughout the Bible, you'll hear people delivering the city, delivering the nation. Jesus delivered men from their sins. That was his whole purpose in coming, was to deliver us from sin. And of course from the consequences thereof, but also from the sin itself, from the power of sin, which it ultimately results in the consequences. But as I've said, I mean, someone, whenever Christians start talking negatively about, like, well, sin and saying, like, well, we're just going to sin, it should not sound like we're making excuses. We acknowledge our sin, but we do not make excuses for it, and we do not, I will never, say, well, I shouldn't ever say that, I'm just going to keep doing these. I have this expectation that the sins. Is it that someone's phone is here? That the sins that compass me about, I'm in the process of overcoming. And so, people say, well, you think you're going to be perfect? I'm like, well, I don't think that if I overcome the sins I know about, that I'm necessarily going to be done. It's just that I'm so blind to my own, I'm not that blind, I hope, but I'm blind enough to my own, I'm simultaneously wise enough and blind enough to understand if everything that I intellectually know is wrong with me, if all that was fixed, I probably still wouldn't be perfect, because I don't know what perfection really looks like. I have an idea of what it looks like because of Christ, because of the teaching of the Scripture, but I haven't lived that. So I don't know internally here what that looks like. I don't know exactly what that looks like. So I would not presume to think that just because I got rid of the sins that I see and that I know about, that would be the full measure of all the sins that God cares about in me. He might find plenty more to work on after I overcome the things I know about. I've got a list of things that, there's that. And God's like, I gotta, I wanted to bring a prop, what would be good is it's too bad. I was gonna pull out, here's a little receipt, not that big, here's my list of problems, and then I was gonna be unfortunately I don't have a recent shopping, because sometimes when I go shopping, because I got, so many kids and stuff, I get receipts that are there we go, there's God's list, you know what I mean? Like Santa Claus's naughty and nice list. Anyways, he's my deliverer. He delivers me. He personally intervenes. So I don't, not only is he just something that I encounter in nature, like this force, like a rock, something elemental that I can hide behind, something basic, something just so very earthly. But because God made the earth, and the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein, it's all God's. He is the rock upon which everything is founded. But he's also deliverer. He also personally, because God is not merely a force of nature like a rock. Some people treat their salvation like they're being saved by a rock. It's just a metaphor. The Lord is my rock is a metaphor, right? God is not a rock, right? See, that's what I'm saying. When I talk about metaphors and taking the Bible too literally, nobody thinks that God is actually a piece of minerals, right? No, that's why literally the Bible is not, everything is not, God is not a literal fortress. He is metaphorically a fortress. And then, it's like, well, no, you got just understand. It's not a big deal. Metaphors are real. It's not literally true, but it's so true. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be literally true to be absolutely true. The Lord is my rock. Absolutely true. Literally true? No. The Lord is my fortress. Literally true? No. But absolutely true? Yes. My deliverer. It could be both literally and absolutely true. Because it's a personal aspect. Because God is a person. God is literally a person. You know what I mean? He's literally three persons. You know what I mean? But he is also a being. And a being can be a deliverer as a person can. And in Christianity, we made this distinction between person and being, which only exists in the Trinity, by the way. Normally, we just think of, if I talk about a person and a being, I'm talking about the same thing. But I want to dive into the Trinity or anything like that here, because that confuses everything, okay? So let's just not bother. He is my deliverer. He delivers me personally. He intervenes in my life. He gets into my business, man. He comes in and helps me out. When I'm in trouble, God intervenes. Sometimes when I'm not, a rock is something you have to flee to for help. A fortress is something you have to enter into for protection. A deliverer comes out of the blue. A deliverer, I mean, maybe not necessarily out of the blue, but a deliverer is not something I have to set up. The deliverer comes and delivers. Hallelujah for that, because I need God to deliver me sometimes. Sometimes I don't know what kind of trouble I'm in. Sometimes I don't know what kind of place I am that I need God to come and intervene and help and fix and and make it right. And I'm glad that he's a person and not a force I got to plug into. He's someone who can look upon my suffering and say, I will help. I mean, without me having to be like, go through some ritual or some form of invocation to attract God to my cause. He can deliver without me even looking for it. And that's scriptural. We looked not, and the salvation came. My God. My God. What is a God? There's a lot of different definitions of what a God is. I've encountered this. It's interesting. I've encountered certain atheists who they want me to define God for them. And it's a very interesting thing because I understand. It's like, it's a term. How do you define God? What is a God? And they try to entrap you with your definition. And I'm like, well, this is just a semantic game because it can mean a lot of things, right? But on a certain level, gods, there are many gods, many thoughts about God. What is a God? I mean, a God in the Old Testament could be a little idol. Or the Greeks, they had their mythology. And they were just these people who were more powerful. Like, they're like supermen. Like the movies. Like they have the movies, they have the superhero Thor, and he's got his hammer, and it's a mythological thing. And even in the movies, he's not presented as we would conceptualize God as a Christian, but as a lesser thing. And that's why in the scripture, even their attitude towards these gods, the gods of the heathen are devils. Or whether it's like the gods, it's something like that. Or they're nothing, or they're just empty. There's all kinds of ways they're looked at, but they're obviously not what we're talking about when we're talking about God. But it is what they're talking about when they're talking about God. Now, the word God, Elohim, in the Hebrew, and I want to look at this actually briefly in the Hebrew. I want to look up God and strength, because I remember just from my studying as a young man in terms of, sorry, I got to do this right. In terms of like studying the Old Testament and trying to look up words and understand what they mean, I was trying to find out, okay, what is a God? What does God mean? What God? We've got a God here. He's my God. Well, what's that mean? He's my God. That's obvious what that means. Is it so obvious? I tell you, I've encountered people from whom that is not obvious. You know what I mean? So it's incumbent upon us to understand what we're talking about when we talk about a God. I've got a God here, man. Well, what's that? What's a God? It's like an all-powerful being. It's not a very useful definition, to tell you the truth. The supreme being. Again, that's not particularly useful. I mean, as far as I've tried those definitions, I said, well, how about this? And they're like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, huh. And as far as I'm going to tell you, well, we'll talk about that in a second. Hold on here. Let's go to Psalm 18. My God, in whom my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler. Okay. God is going to be Elohim. Now, Elohim is a word very common in the Old Testament, obviously, because it's God. And it is is this El here instead of Elohim? So it's just El. Okay, that's interesting. Now, what's strength? Sur. No, I can't. Cliff Rock, thanks. Really? Is that right? That makes me want to get my dictionary out, but I don't have that luxury. I'm relying on Sur, really. Now see, both rock and strength come from this. Well, both have meaning. Here's the first one: rock, a crag or cliff. Crag, cliff. From an unused meaning to be lofty, a craggy rock. A lot of times they would like flee up into the rocks of the mountains type stuff, yeah, to hide and find shelter in the crags and cracks and crevices of the rock. Strong places to hide. Now this word's strength is rock or cliff, and it means properly a cliff or sharp rock as compressed. Generally a rock or boulder, figuratively a refuge, also an edge as precipitous. Edge, mighty. These are all the ways it's translated. Edge, mighty one, God. Rock, sharp, stone, strength, strong. So it's two words for rock here, actually. Just two different kinds. And then, in fact, the second one, honestly, the second word, strength, really aligns more with what I was saying about rock originally. Because, and this is the problem with translation and stuff, the first word rock is a lot like fortress, but it's more like a natural fortress, like craggy, rocky heights. Whereas the second rock is more like a rock or a boulder, which is kind of what I was talking about the first time. So that's fine, because it's like, because I already kind of talked about that aspect, and now I don't have to blow out my thought process on just the idea of strength. But the word Elohim, from which we get Elohim, but here it is just El, which is not God, or is it Elohim here? I have to actually, is it really? Wait, let's see. Okay, they say El there. I wonder if it says God any other place where they go Elohim. I'm just curious. Because it's like when you go to the, it's pronounced Ale. That's interesting there, because it's just El both these times. Now I want to check Genesis real quick, because it's like, just because I want to make sure, are they linking these things up properly? Now here in Genesis 1, it's Elohim, which is the more normal. Well, Elohim is plural of El, or Ale. Actually, it's long A sound for the E. Elohim is plural. And the word El at its most basic, let's go back and look at that. It means like mighty. Shortened from Ael, strength, as an adjective mighty, especially the Almighty, but used of any deity. It's like a mighty one, Ael. So the idea of God is when we talk about God, especially the Old Testament conceptualization of the word God, there are many, God is referred to as the Lord. He's referred to by a proper name, Yahweh, right? But he's also referred to as the word we use, God, which we all kind of know what it means, but it doesn't mean, like a little grandpa up in the sky. What it means is the mighty one, the one with the power, the one who is the power. You know what I mean? And in our concept, and obviously, it is a power. You know what I mean? And that is the basic idea behind the word that we translate God. Mighty. Being full of might. And that's that's why God is able to deliver, because he is full of might. Obviously, that's why the word God is applied in various places to the gods of the heathen, even to human judges. I have said you are gods. All of you are children of the Most High, but you shall die like men. Psalm 82. So it can even be applied to humans in rare instances, meaning that they sit like gods, like mighty ones above other men. You know what I mean? And so God, though we think of it as like there's but one God, it is we have basically taken that term, extracted it from its normal use, and applied it exclusively to what we call God, which is the God, the Almighty God, the God who is eternal in the heavens, and all those, all the attributes we would normally ascribe to the Christian God, we put into the idea of God. But the base root idea of is that He is the mighty one to whom we turn. And in a lot of contexts, that can be, God is, what I'm trying to get at is like, people have other gods, or they have things that serve as God. Meaning, God is a mighty person, right? But our God, right? But the idea of a God is a mighty one. And when you have respect to might, to power, it often changes your behavior. For example, when you're driving down the highway and you see a police officer in his vehicle, if you see him, you will immediately check your speed. And if you're like me, you will adjust it if necessary, bringing it down if you're going too fast, or doing nothing if you're not going too fast. I try not to go too fast. I try to, mostly if I'm speeding, it's because I'm kind of just dreaming a bit, not watching my speedometer. Just kind of chugging along in the sun. I speed more in the summertime because it's beautiful out, and it's just, it's hard to tell how fast you're going because of velocitation, which is the tendency of the mind when you drive for a while to make high speeds seem slower. I learned that in driver's ed when I was in high school. And it's a word I've always struggled to remember, velocitation. I just like it, though. I just like that word. So, when you see the power and the might of the policeman, you're like, hey, that something can happen here, so I best, slow down, right? Because the might is right there. It's apparent. He can just stop you. At least you might know it. Some people don't know it. Some people don't know that they don't have any respect for the power. They don't understand He beareth not the sword in vain. He beareth not the sword in vain. That guy's carrying a pistol, and he has the authority of law. If you mess with him, you can get hurt. Or you can get carted off to jail. A lot of things can happen, when you mess with the power, with the might. So God, is not a cosmic cop, like waiting to do that to us necessarily. A lot of times people have that view of God, that He's just like this cosmic cop waiting to pounce on you when you do things wrong. And even policemen aren't like that, generally. We have to significantly provoke them, and then things happen. I've never had a negative experience with the police, They've always treated me fairly because I was always very respectful to them. Probably that. And there's probably other factors too, Other factors too, no doubt. But there's ways to set people at their ease, I'll tell you that. So, God as the idea of strength, and all I'm getting at basically is that, and I'm not laying the groundwork for it particularly well, but one of the things I say about people is that some people, though they say they don't believe in God as a person, they actually have a functional God in their life, which represents the reason they do things that are moral. Because there's no rational reason for them to do things which are moral. It's because there is a power that they believe in. It may be some, because some people would say like, well, I wouldn't do a murder because it's illegal, and they'd come and get me and there'd be trouble. That's a rational reason. But there are other things which are not illegal necessarily. Or what if no one would find out? What if no one would find out about illegal deeds? Because I've heard atheists insist that they are moral without God. But I would say that their morality comes from a respect for something that is bigger than them, a standard that is arbitrary and larger and powerful, that they know is right and wrong. And they follow that. Though they call it not God, it essentially is a form of God. It's an empty shell of a God, but it's kind of like God stripped of all the personality with just the idea that there's some big, powerful thing out there that we ought to pay attention to. Otherwise, bad things will happen. He is my God. I give attention to my God that I might be saved, and that I would be looked upon favorably by the power. He is the power. He is the might. He is my strength. And that's the rock. We already talked about the rock. When I talked about the first rock, I also talked about that. I mean, there was some allusion to the idea of fleeing to heights and all that stuff, but I think we got that covered good enough. In whom I will trust. We trust God. We don't just... It's not just a question of, I believe God exists. And to have faith in God is not to just say, like, well, I believe He is. He exists. There is a God. Well, good for you. As James said, the demons also believe and tremble. You realize there's a God. Excellent for you. You know, I've always believed in Him. I've had my doubts, right? He gave me such, what would I call it? Interaction, signs, miracle. You know, He gave me such as I needed that I would always believe in Him. And I'm referring to when I received the Holy Spirit. He's done things for me that make me believe in Him even more. Right? And that belief in His existence causes me to try to learn more about God. And the more I grow close to God, and the more I live my life under the shadow of God's wings, I guess you could say metaphorically, meaning, or under the shadow of just thinking, just trying to be mindful of the fact that God is there. God is always there. He's with me. You know what I mean? I live with Him over my shoulder. You know, He's very quiet, innocuous, never talks, you know, but I believe He's there and I trust Him. You know what I mean? I believe He's there and I trust Him. I believe He makes me think certain ways sometimes because His Spirit is in me. I'm not always so good at telling when that is and when that isn't. You know what I mean? I don't know. I think it's God. When I think it's God, I feel my heart moved upon by the Lord. A lot of times I just know it's the Lord because I know it's right. You know, when things are right, you know, some things I don't need to have God come and whisper in my ear about things that are right and things that are wrong. You know what I mean? I don't even go, hey, let me tell you a secret. Whatever, you know, and then give me some message. Sometimes, some things we just know. You know, it's like, you think about like the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? The guy got injured on the way, he was on the road and he got injured. Well, he actually got attacked. And these religious hypocrites come along and they won't go near him. But then the Samaritan, the people who the Jews hated, comes along and bandages him up, takes him to an inn, pays for his, you know, takes care of him. He didn't need God to tell him what was right, what he ought to do. You know what I mean? He didn't need God to say, Samaritan, help this man. Oh, okay, God. But he was just going to walk around just like that. The other men aren't listening to God. You know what I mean? The Good Samaritan listens to God. He listens to what God has revealed to him about right and wrong, good and evil. You know what I mean? I don't need a special word necessarily to know, like, hey, this is right now what God wants me to do. I don't need to tell. I've been instructed. I don't have to have like a special. I don't need him come down with the ringing of bells and the singing of angels and then tell me, oh, Paul, I want you to do what's right. Or Paul, tell the people to do what's right. Okay, Lord, that's a new message. You know what I mean? Tell them that it's wrong to destroy the dwelling places of the poor. Tell them it's wrong. You know, how many times do the prophets have to say that before I'm like, I don't need further confirmation. Thus saith the Lord. You know? I know what he says. I just apply it to this circumstance. I trust God. He is with me, and I don't. He's not sitting over my shoulder like a cosmic cop. He's sitting over my shoulder, watching me, watching my back. You know what I mean? I trust it's like he's back there, and he's not snooping or being, you know what I mean? Like he's not there like a hostile force. He watches all I do, but he's here to help me. His desire is to help me overcome sins. He's not here to pounce on me for my sins. He's here to help me and make me better. He's here to watch me from behind, that I be not waylaid by evil men. He is with me always. I trust him. Faith is about putting our trust in Jesus. For your salvation, yes, but my life right now, me living right this instant, is my salvation. This life I have. What do you think salvation is? It's life everlasting. This is the beginning of that. This is part of that everlasting life. My salvation is today. Today is the day of salvation. God is here to save me today, tomorrow, and if I die, he'll raise me from the dead and save me again. You know what I mean? It's not like starting over from scratch. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's there constantly to save me. Not just waiting for the last day. Okay, well, here's your certificate. You know, like, will you put your faith in Jesus? Yes, well, here's your certificate of salvation. Put that in your pocket and then go back to your life. I trust in God for my salvation now. You know, like I said, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. That's from, isn't that now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Something that's rung a bell from Catholic Church. Now and at the hour. I can just hear a group of people chanting it. Now and at the hour of our death. Amen. It was funny having an experience in Catholic Church as a kid. Like I said, I only went there when I was really young. Like, I think till I was about 9 or 10. Then we started having football instead. You know. Pee-wee football. So, in whom I trust, my buckler, and the horn of my salvation, and my high tower. Okay, buckler is a kind of shield, a small shield, but whatever. Technically, in the English sense, a buckler is a small shield, but I don't know if that's important at all here. It means a shield. I mean, do I have to look it up? Do you have to? I'm just gonna peek. Is there any reason I shouldn't trust this translation? I so badly just don't want to have to go to other translations. I wish there was one I felt truly. Yeah, it means a shield. Karen, a horn. Salvation, deliver is palat, one who causes to escape. Deliverance is salvation, safety, welfare. Okay, high tower. Okay, good. All right. Now, it may seem obvious again. It's like, oh, shield, Paul. That's nothing. There's nothing to talk about there. And I suppose, it's a very simple metaphor of God is my shield. I take God up in my arm. God, it's like he is like a weapon for me. A defensive weapon, though there's the word of God, which is also the offensive weapon, right? The shield of faith wherewith you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, Ephesians chapter 6, right? This the gospel armor. We have the shield. The shield is a symbol that goes back in the Old Testament all over the place. Thou, O Lord, art a shield for me. Is it my glory and the lifter of my head? Whatever. God is a lot of things to us. My glory and the lifter of my head, my shield and whatever. It could be anything. It could be many things, not anything, obviously. So I take him up like a shield. It's like I can bring God to bear. God is watching my back, but he's also at my front. And he gives himself into my hands so that I can, blessed is the Lord, my rock. Wait, I'm trying to think. I don't remember the exact formulation, but I'm thinking of the Psalm, was it 144? Where I used for the battle hymn of David and Goliath, right? He teaches my hands to war and my fingers to fight. Like, God does not just expect us to passively receive salvation. It is not a purely passive activity. There is a passive aspect of our relationship with God where he is just out there looking out for us, right? All things work together for good for those that love God. There is a passive, I'm just here and God he's around me. He's about, he's looking out for me. He's got my back. He's planning for me. He's getting everything in the way of salvation for me ready that I can walk it. But I also need to participate. I will walk it. God is not merely my rear guard, and that's the Lord shall be thy rearward, which is the rear guard. That's another thing. It's like, that's why I said when I trust him, I liken that to, he didn't mention the Lord is our reward. I remember a friend of mine thought that meant my reward again, as opposed to what it meant which is a rear guard. The Lord is my rear guard. He's watching my back. That's why, when I talk about trust, I think about things like that. When I think about a buckler, I mean, it's something like that. God he's not only bringing his power to bear for my salvation, but he has also given me of his power into my hand, both right and left, sword and shield. And what am I to do with it? I'm to do with that. I'm to use that, and for whatever purpose God, I don't know, but they are things that a shield is to be used. A sword is to be wielded. It is to be put forth and used for the purpose. It quenches the fiery darts of the wicked because you got to go out to battle sometimes. God he's not just there like, he's not a helicopter parent hovering over me, constantly intervening, to make sure I never have to struggle. God he's there watching, protecting me, my salvation, but he's setting my life up in such a way so that I struggle just enough. Because without some sort of struggle, there's no growth. Without some sort of battle, there's no experience. There's no, enlightenment, really, without some sort of push-pull conflict. At least as far as in human experience. My life is so cushy and so protected. It's like there's dangers to that. Look what happened to Solomon. At the end of his life, he became corrupted. He had it all. God was there. David, but Saul, not did I say Saul, I meant Solomon, right? I hope I said Solomon. But if you have the way before you plowed too clean, bulldozer parenting. There's another one. Helicopter parenting, bulldozer parenting. Just make sure the way in front of you is just totally free of obstacles. Makes you a weak person. I like bulldozer parents. God is neither helicopter parent nor bulldozer parent. He's there making sure, he's not gonna let me be destroyed. I mean, I may die, but I won't be destroyed. He'll raise me from the dead. But I don't even want to die. I don't want to die. That's not certainly not at this moment in my life. I'm not ready for it. But God's will be done. But also, I've got a shield in my hand. I'm sure not going to let anything kill me when I've got God in my hand to protect me. I will wield the Lord as my defense. I will wield the Lord as my offense. I will take him up like sword, and I will cut them down with the words of my mouth, with the words he's given me. And I will take his shield up, and all the things they send against me, I will quench and I will set their fire to the water. Because I have an everlasting well of water within me, welling up into everlasting life. Send me your flaming darts against me, and I will put them out, because God is with me. That's me, the shield. I got God with me, and not just in the sense of he's just somewhere around here. No. He's active with me, meaning I'm acting as his agent. The horn of my salvation. I love the horn analogy. It's like analogy is an analogy, or the metaphor of the horn. There's a lot of, I remember I used to get confused about the horn, and people have been confused about the horn for centuries. There's some famous medieval, or not medieval, Renaissance. It would be Renaissance, because medieval, they didn't have very good sculpture. You know, in the Renaissance, they had really cool sculpture. That's when you got the cool stuff. And I don't remember if it's done by Michelangelo or who, but there's a version of Moses from the Renaissance, and he has horns on his head. Because that's what it says in the Bible. He came down from the mountain and he had horns. That's the literal translation. It also talks about the four corners of the altar. They call them the horns of the altar, and the altar is often portrayed with horns. Now, a horn represents, one, the power of certain beasts, right? The certain beasts like cows. It's horns are given, at least in the animals that we exist with. Certain carnivorous animals had horns in the time of the dinosaurs, but in our experience, in the life we have with these animals, in the biblical, as far as anything I've ever seen, the animals with the horns. Well, the dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. But anyway, so it's not even a point, but about the animals, what kind of animals that they're still dangerous. A rhinoceros is dangerous. So is so is a cattle. I don't know what's the. It's a cow. Seems to me isn't that the female of the? You know what I mean? I know what a steer is. I know what a cow is. I know what a bull is. But what are they all? Are they aurochs? The descendants of the aurochs? That was the giant. Our cows are descended from these giant animals that used to roam Europe. And the domesticated version of that is, I guess, descended from that. That's what they say. Okay. Anyways, but the horns on these animals, like you think deer with all their horns and stuff, that's their thing, their defense. That's their power, right? It represents It represents an emanation of power. Like when Moses had horns on his head, what it meant was it was like emanations. They talk about the psychics say, you have a really amazing aura, dude. But it's like an aura, I suppose. It was a visible sign of power upon his head. And that's it wouldn't, when they say he has horns, there's a I did Habakkuk, the prayer of Habakkuk the prophet, with a friend of mine. There's a song on my website, oraclesofgod.org, on the music page, and I forgot under what you can look for it. Hunt around. Habakkuk 3. There was one part where it says he had horns in his hand, and there was the hiding of his power. Why? Talking about God. Why would he just have horns coming out of his hand? No. What it means is imagine he's holding out his hand, and he's got just rays of light beaming out like horns. Projections. Things that stick out. That's what a horn is. It sticks out. It projects forward and outward. You know what I mean? And so what it means is essentially he is the power of my salvation. He is the tip of the spear that brings about my salvation. You know what I mean? He is the active part. The physical manifestation of power, you know what I mean? At least, metaphorically speaking, which brings my salvation. And the same thing when the beast has horns and stuff, it's his power. He has power. They represent powers. The 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings. A king is a king is the extracted. What makes a man king? Well, a man occupies the place of king. A king is a power position, and a position of absolute power, right? That's what a king is an absolute monarch. Except for the ones they got these days, right? They're constitutional monarchs, which is a little less kingy than we've had in the past, right? But, okay, so he is the point of my salvation. I think I said enough about that. My high tower. The high tower to which we flee. He is something, and again, we already talked about fortress. And I think when I looked at this in the, I really shouldn't do it that way. There, now I can secretly look. I just want to see if there's high tower is a single word, misgab, a secure height, retreat, or stronghold. Okay, whereas fortress is castle. Yeah, okay. And they're basically somewhat synonymous. You know, like if I said castle and fortress, there's obviously some in your mind that brings about different images. We don't know exactly what the different images would be to to the ancient Hebrews. They're what they would distinguish between what is a fortress and what is a high tower. But when they call it a high tower, you know, there's something different about like I mean, when I think about fortress, I think about something in terms of the thickness of the walls, as opposed to a high tower where I think of the commanding heights, because being high above everything gives you some important things. God is my fortress. He's like these thick walls that protect me from the enemy, right? He keeps out the bad stuff. But he's also my high tower, meaning in God, I have a broader view. I occupy the commanding heights. You know, I live on a hill. And I like being able to see for miles in every direction. You know what I mean? I have a clear line of sight in every direction. I like that. You know what I mean? I can look north, south, east, west and see for miles. Miles. I mean, I think the shortest view I have is probably to the southeast, I guess, you know. And that's through a cornfield anyways, but it's like, you know, only 2 miles of clear line of sight. There's nothing blocking my view for miles in every direction until the corn comes up, and then in the case I get closed in, right? But I have a high tower from which I can look out and still see over it. And being in that, you know, and so what God gives us is insight. Vision. I mean, we can understand and see. When you are in your high tower, you can see the state of the battle. You can see the state of the enemy. They can't hide from you. They array themselves in their camps round about you, and you look out from your high place and you can say, how many men have come against us? What weapons of war do they possess? Do they have siege engines? And this is just in the metaphor, right? But you can see what that means. It's like, he gives us understanding. He gives us information. We see better through God. He you know, and by being in the Lord, we have a better insight into the battle. Because you know, these are very, you know, the metaphors here are very battle related. Because remember, this psalm is about when God delivered him from the hand of all his enemies. So he's using very militaristic terms to understand God from the Lord, from the perspective of one who delivers from enemies. And he's looking, you know, he's thinking about all the things. Horn also could be a signaling horn, by the way. I didn't cover that, and let's use that. That'll be the final thing we'll talk about. Horn, in terms of horns, were also used for becoming like trumpets. They would carve them out and, you know, it's funny, when I was at the protest in Springfield, there was a guy there with a big horn, and he kept blowing it and go, like when the applause lines came out. And that okay. The horn of my salvation. So, meaning, the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. The horn signifies, the horn is a signal. You know what I mean? I've mentioned this, that the trumpets of Revelation need to be clearly perceived. Meaning when they happen, we'll know we're looking at the trumpets. I sincerely believe that. Whatever, even if they're symbolic, to a great degree, I try to interpret them in every way possible, so that when I see the actual events, I will go, oh, this is the first trumpet, second, third, fourth. I think the first 4 are actually very literal, personally. And then in the fifth one, you start getting symbolic things, because that's when people are going to start getting confused. People are not going to, but the wise will understand the meaning of the locus and all that when it comes about. And I think maybe I already do. And you can listen to the study on Revelation. It's been a couple of years now, and obviously I could teach Revelation every year, and it probably, it's always moving. My understanding is growing. A lot of times I give things based on my current state. But anyways, we're probably going to go up to Psalm 25, then we'll go to the New Testament again, maybe come back to the Psalms again for a while, or maybe go on to some other thing for a while. Psalms are going to be like something, there's 150 Psalms. So I've decided we're going to take them at 25 at a time. So we're going to go to chapter 25, then we're going to take a break. We'll go another 25 at some point in the future. And I think that's a nice pace, because otherwise we'll be in Psalms. I could be in Psalms forever. Let's just get lost in the Psalms? Is that what we should? I mean, I don't know. Maybe, I haven't heard anyone's opinion on it. But I want to teach other books and not just Psalms. So I may not do any other big books until we get through the Psalms. We might just do a bunch of little ones, which would be kind of fun. Maybe cover the rest of the minor prophets. Maybe cover more of the Epistle of Paul. So I have anything more to say about the horn of... Well, the trumpets of Revelation, I talked about that, but that's not what I wanted to say about horn of salvation. Horn of salvation, it signifies salvation. When the trumpet sounds, it means rescue. It's like the cavalry's coming, or attack. Let's defeat the enemy is on the run. Cut them down. Like sounding the horn, the trumpet that signifies salvation has come. Also, when you use the horn, it's funny, the reversing the horn and blowing through it to make a signal is also a projection. It creates sound waves that go out. The way a horn goes out from the body of some beast, so also the sound of victory goes forth from a horn. Or the signal of also distress, all kinds of signals. But if it's the horn of salvation, it's the signal of victory. He is the one who signals my victory. The appearance of God on the scene means I win, and he is ever with me. So what's that mean? That means the horn of victory is always sounding. I am on the high tower with the horn of victory, and I have the sword and the shield of God in my hands. And therefore I shall not be moved. Therefore I trust in him, because I have the victory. And that's the message David is giving here in this psalm. We've only covered the first two verses. Well, and we'll just say we'll pick it up with verse 3. We already read it, but verse 3 is a good place to pick up on Monday. We will not labor all these points. I will say we talked about these in depth on Friday. It's a nice sort of preamble to going into the rest of the psalm. To me, it's like I can't just blow by this without talking about it, because there's so much. This is the thing. Oh, the depths. People really, the depths of his knowledge and this and that and the other, right? And I understand how people can preach on just one verse. You know what I mean? But I find it very edifying to, preach on one verse and then the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. So if that's something you want to listen to, we will continue this on Monday. Thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to being back again on Monday to continue in Psalms chapter 18. Not chapter, it's the 18th Psalm. All right, and I lost my audio. All right, let's bring up a song to say goodbye.
I have chosen the way of the truth. Thy judgments have laid before me. I have stuck to thy testimonies. O Lord, put me not to shame. I will run the way of thy commandments. When thou shalt enlarge my heart, teach me, O Lord, the way of thy statutes, and I shall keep it unto the end. Give me understanding, and I shall keep thy law, yea, I shall observe it with my whole heart.